Hello, and welcome to a new episode of The Career Changers. Our guest today is Chantal Dempsey, mindset coach. After 15 years as a criminal profiler and a few years creating a home improvement company, she completely changed her life in her 40s and retrained to pursue her true vocation to become a life coach and therapist. This was the time to follow her calling. Today, we are going to talk about her career change and how healing your inner child can lead you to turn your life around. Hi, Chantal. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Elisa. I really appreciate it.
I'm really looking forward to have this conversation about how to heal our inner child. But first of all, I would like to discover more about you and start with your background. So, how did you start your professional life, or better, what was your first job?
So my first job, obviously I had loads of little jobs for beer money at university and before that, but my first main job was actually as a criminal analyst for what is now the NCA, the National Crime Agency.
So was that your dream job when you were a child, or did you have different ambitions?
You know what, I wanted to be a psychologist when I was, and I've always had this appeal to the human mind and psychology and how it works. And I remember reading Sigmund Freud's books on dreams at like age 12. So no, I kind of really fell into the first career just by chance.
I identify with that. I discovered Sigmund Freud very early in life as well.
Really? Oh, really? Yeah, there you go.
So what did you study then? What is your educational background?
So I studied law. Not because I really wanted to, I guess, because it was the parenting pressure. So I just studied law, and then I did a master's as well, a postgraduate in international law. But then I'd never ended up becoming a lawyer. I kind of fell into that career in law enforcement instead.
So going back to that first job, how did you progress your career, and when did you arrive to the point where you were not happy anymore?
That's a great question, Elisa. I started as an intelligence analyst, a criminal analyst, and I moved up the ranks to become a team leader and a manager. And the great thing about law enforcement, and in particular the National Crime Agency and its precursors, it wasn't always called the NCA, there's a lot of different opportunities, doing a lot of very diverse jobs. So I did a lot of very different things, which I loved. And I'd say for 10 years, I absolutely loved it. The people are amazing. The job was excellent. And then slowly but surely, like a lot of vocational jobs and a lot of public sector jobs, it became very red tape. There was a lot of bureaucracy, and then you just couldn't do the job. And you ended up, particularly in this kind of environment where you had things that really mattered, people that needed to be protected, and you couldn't do it because you had to wait for some signature or some rule that was made up by some bureaucrats. And so it became more and more frustrating. And to summarize, I ended up having enough and ended up leaving.
So we can say that frustration was behind your reason to wanted
Yes.
to make a career change.
Yes.
So how and when did you start thinking about becoming a mindset coach?
Like we were saying, Elisa, I was always very attracted to psychology. Whilst I was in law enforcement, I also always continued reading and training because I did a lot of criminal profiling. So a lot had to do with psychology as well. And personally, I always had this irresistible urge to help. And a lot of people would always say to me, started saying to me when the life coach became a thing, you should be a life coach. People always used to come to me for advice. It started to become a bit of a thing. And I started to realize that this really was my calling.
Let's talk about the main topic of these conversations, healing your inner child. So I thought to go back to the basics and start with defining what is actually our inner child.
Brilliant. So there's actually two aspects to your inner child. Your inner child is, to answer the question first and foremost, is the child within you. So you as a child who remains within you. And there are two aspects to that inner child. There's one aspect, which is the joyful part of you, the part of you that many of us forget as an adult. And you wouldn't believe the amount of people, Eliza, who I say, what do you love doing? What makes you happy? And they cannot answer the question, because you just end up forgetting. You get into work and things and kids and whatever it is, and then you forget what makes you happy. So there's that aspect of your inner child, which is important to reconnect with, on that creative aspect, that joyful aspect. But to what this conversation and the healing part of it is about is the wounded inner child that you have inside of you, and that comes up when it's triggered.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So, well, part of your work, I guess, is to support people to heal their inner child. So,
Yes.
what are the ways that we can heal that part of us?
The first thing to do is to acknowledge that there is such a thing as your inner child. And I know it can be a bit of a weird concept, because you don't physically have a child living inside of you. But it's acknowledging that sometimes, and we would all have that, unless you had the absolute perfect childhood, which I can't imagine anybody having. I haven't met anyone that had anyway, but everyone, no matter how happy you always have some sort of weeds that are there, that got planted, that haven't been removed, and that create triggers today. So we would all have situations where something happens and it triggers something in us. And as a result, we have a reaction that is disproportionate to the experience that we're having or the situation that is happening. So effectively, to put it simply, where we overreact. And that is because that inner child is triggered, and the wounded inner child that is still wounded isn't well. So every time a situation happens to trigger that wound, it's a bit like every time it adds salt to the wound, and it never heals.
So why is it important to focus on healing our inner child before being able to turn our lives around? Because sometimes the external world may try to distract us more on the outside of us and say, maybe if you do this or that, you're going to be happier. But sometimes we just need to go inside instead.
Yes, absolutely. I love that question, Elisa. The reason is that happiness and confidence and self-esteem and all of these things come from the inside. It comes from you, and only you can access that, no one else. So like you were saying, sometimes we wait on something to happen or somebody to make us better or happier. This doesn't work. You cannot ever rely on somebody else for your own happiness. You cannot rely on a job or on going on holiday, or you can't rely on things that can be removed from you, taken away from you. Self-esteem, which is the building block of everything, is what needs to be worked on for us to find the peace that we want, the confidence that we want, the happiness that we want. That is the only way.
One of the most important aspects of our lives are our relationships. So how does healing the inner child contribute to have better relationship with ourselves and the others as well?
Because if you go and to give the example of a relationship, like a partnership, and in fact any relationship or any partnership, when two people get together having a lot of baggage and triggers, they will keep on triggering each other, and then what can happen that is not a healthy way is that they rely on each other for happiness. Whereas if you do the work on yourself first, and you remove the triggers, or at least you understand the triggers, and you commit to personal development, you commit to personal responsibility, which is a great one, then when you go into a relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship or any type of relationship, then you can really understand each other a lot better and not get triggered, or at least understand the triggers and be able to remedy.
For those that are just beginning their inner child healing journey, what advice would you offer?
So the first thing, to understand that there is an inner child and connect with that inner child. And I would go back to what I was saying at the beginning, where you have those two aspects of the inner child. So the joyful aspect, the creative aspect, and the one that needs healing. So I would connect with both. I would almost journal or write down the triggers So notice, when do you, again, overreact? When do you react to situations in ways that are disproportional to what they actually are? And write it down, and then maybe go back in time and space almost. And there's obviously therapies and things that you can put in place to do that in a more focused way. But where did that come from? And again, understanding, it's a great basis for starting to work on it, remedy it. And I would also tap into the joyful child.
I was going to ask you because
Yeah.
it made me really curious.
It is so simple, but we don't do it. We tend to not do it. What makes you happy? What energizes you? What makes you happy? When are you at your most creative? And the most, for those who have children, watch your children and see how simply they can be joyful and reconnect with that. Creativity is always a good one. What are you good at? What do you love doing? Then do more of it.
Mm. So are there any resources, books, or tools you recommend for further exploration?
Yes, there's quite a lot of books on healing your inner child, which is probably the one that you'd want to get. There is a very simple technique that you can use, which is called the Gestalt chair technique, where you imagine yourself sat on a chair in front of you, sat on a chair facing you, your inner child, the child version of you. And have like a little session whereby you first start a dialogue and talk to each other, most as if one other option is to imagine that you travel back in time and talk to the child version of you, and then be the adult that you would have liked to have as a child, particularly if there's any situations of traumas or difficult situations, and then comfort and protect that child. Another thing can be writing a letter to your inner child and talk about whatever comes up. And it can be things like, this is what I've done. So you can explain, almost write an informative letter, but also talking about how you feel. It can be a letter of maybe forgiveness for things that you've done, or, anything that needs to be addressed that can go, that's very therapeutic to do that. I mean, I do programs, of course, coaching, healing your inner child. And there is a technique that it's called timeline therapy, which is done either under mild hypnosis or under NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. And you do go back, take a journey with your mind in time and space to revisit events that have significantly contributed to the issue you have today. So let's say your issue is anxiety, for example. We would revisit maybe 3 or 4 significant events, and then you, as the adult that you are today, traveling in time and space, and then you talk to the child, you comfort the child, and you heal that child. It's a very beautiful therapy. And then what that does is that it closes the wound, so it stops today being triggered over and over and over. There's a lot to do.
So do you think this is an ongoing process, or is it possible to close the wound? Or healing our inner child is an ongoing lifetime project?
I think it depends what your experience is and what your background and how deep-rooted the trauma is. In the programs I do, for example, they tend to be 6-week programs, and after 6 weeks, the issues would be resolved. They would be resolved, but then they would have a set, like a toolbox of tools and techniques that they then know how to apply. In other terms, when they get triggered, which would already happen less, they know how to respond. They know what's happening, they understand it, they know where it comes from, they know how to address it, and they can resolve it very, very easily. So with a lot more emotional resilience, sometimes it can take a lot longer. So you would have the same process. So the process is very similar, but for some people, if it's very deep-rooted, then it will take longer and it will take more effort. But it's absolutely 100% possible for everyone to overcome any issues that stem from childhood. It's absolutely possible. Again, many people don't know that, but it's absolutely possible to overcome anxiety completely. And it's absolutely possible to have a very strong self-belief. All these things are possible, and we all have the resources inside of us to do it. It's just that a lot of people don't know how.
And in your experience, what are the biggest challenges someone may face when they initially start to understand this concept of healing the inner child?
Probably the main challenge is taking control of your thoughts. Again, that can be done, absolutely. But I think it's disrupting a habit, because the way the program has been running, let's say the program of anxiety, or whichever program comes from a wounded inner child, or the lack of self-belief, or the self-doubt, or anything like that, that does come from somewhere. So it's about stopping that habit. So a program is something that runs a habit. You get the habit of, for example, thinking negatively, or shaming yourself, or anything like that. Then it's about, so you'll have the tools and the know-how, but it's about doing it, and it's about kind of actually changing the habit, which can be hard. That probably would be one of the main challenges I see people face.
So we often forget how each of us with our choices can have a positive impact in the world. How do you feel you're making the world a better place?
You know what, Eliza, I think we all make the world a better place with very small things, just even smiling at somebody, and we probably don't even realize. I think to answer your question, I think my superpower, if you like, is to empower people. And I love doing that. And I think I'm good at it. That's my way of making the world a better place. I like to show people that they can do it, because they can, and everybody can do it. It's just about having the self-belief and the confidence to do it.
Mm. So many times starting a healing process is because we are unhappy with our circumstances or with our life. And so it's just the beginning of a journey that leads us to turn our life around. So in your experience, what advice would you give to anyone looking to change their life?
Wow, so this is one of my favorite things to talk about. You have people who are stuck in a career or in a relationship or in somewhere for years and years and years and years, and then one day something changes, and there is like this breakthrough of enough, no more. This, I don't want this anymore. I'm going to change my life now, and there's that little spark that changes everything. And I'd love to find a way to recreate that so that you could give that to everyone, you know, who needs it. But I think what the turning point is motivation. Suddenly something happens that you get really motivated to get up here. So you might be down here, you might feel like you're stuck, you might feel like you're in a box, you might feel like your life is passing you by, and all of these things. And then suddenly you find the motivation to do all the things that you need to do to change it, because it's never easy, of course. But I think it's motivation. That is what will sustain the momentum and the spark, and that will give you the drive to take the action that you need to take.
Mm. So before we reach the end of this episode with our last question, how and where anyone can reach out to you if they would like to get in touch?
Yeah, great. So my website, chantaldempsey.com, and all the details of everything I can help with is in there. There is a lot of inner child in there. I am a mindset coach. I work on mindset a lot, because when you shift your mindset, then everything changes. My specialties are working with confidence and self-esteem, and anxiety, because they go together a lot, because self-belief and self-esteem is the building block. If that is very, very strong, then you wouldn't have anxiety. I mean, you would have anxiety like everybody does. Like if you're about to give us, I don't know, a presentation, you'd have that kind of small, but you wouldn't have any chronic anxiety. You wouldn't have, because you believe in yourself, you know that you have the resilience to deal with anything, whatever happens. So you're ready to face the uncertain. So yeah, chantaldempsey.com.
Well, that sounds great. Something that every one of us, I think, would like to achieve. To reach now the last question that we asked to all of our guests, if you could give yourself a piece of advice, what would you say to your younger self?
I would say happiness and confidence comes from the inside. Don't wait on a job, don't wait on something to happen, don't wait on a person, don't wait on any of that. Get it yourself. That's what I would say.
Well, thank you, Chantal, so much for joining us today and sharing your inspirational career change story and wisdom with our listeners.
Thank you so much, Elise. I really, really appreciate you.
Thank you. And the last message for our listeners, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tune in next week for a new inspirational episode of the Career Changes. Thank you.